Miniature Market has thousands of board games at discounted prices. Click the direct link below to see all of those discounted games. Hello my friends, today we find ourselves at a crime scene where a horrendous murder has taken place. Now we're a detective trying to figure out who the murderer is and what social groups are they part of and who might be helping them along and what their motive is. That's the other player. One player or team plays the murderer, one player or team plays the detectives. Today we're taking a look at Intent to Kill. This is from Hobby World, a Russian game publisher. Let me show you how the game works. I'll see you on the other side. In Intent to Kill, one player is going to be the murderer or team, and one team or person is going to be the detective. Now the murderer is going to be trying to murder different suspects throughout the case, and they are going to be using one of these motives. Now there are 12 total motives in the game. You'll only use 6 or 8 of them each game, depending on the difficulty level and things like that. So for example, all victims have to be of the same sex. So the murderer is going to shuffle these up and they'll know randomly which one is theirs, and the other player is trying to figure out what it is by who they murder. You can kill only civilians that are alone in a block, or the murderer cannot murder in the 4 central blocks of the city, or you cannot murder anyone in the 8 blocks surrounding the detective marker, which you're going to be using around. Or all victims have to be from different social groups. Now if we look at this, female, male, social group, they're from the immigrants. This is from the jet set group, for example. So the little logo here tells you what those are. But there are also different things about them. Female, male, 20s, 40s, large build, small build, medium height, small height. And so those are the things that you're going to be trying to do. The murderer will know who they are. They get randomly selected. They're going to be one of the characters on the board, and they're going around and they're going to be murdering these different ones, and the detective is trying to figure out who they are by questioning about these different attributes, and they're trying to figure out the motive. Like you cannot murder intimidated civilians, because sometimes the murderer will be able to intimidate civilians, meaning the detective won't be able to question them and ask them about the murderer and things like that. So in a general scheme of things, the murderer is trying to get away with murder and the detective is trying to catch them. So here's the board for the basic setup. Now there's all sorts of different scenarios you can play with different setups and such, but there are 20 characters on the board. Now the murderer is randomly going to be one of these characters, and they'll know that, and you're trying to figure out which one is that murderer. Now the game is going to be 5 or 6 rounds. The murderer is going to end up murdering 5 different people, and by the time they finish their 5th murder at the end of that round, if the detective hasn't figured out A, who the murderer is, and B, what their motive was, then the murderer wins. But if they're able to decipher both of those, the murderer and their motive, then the detective wins. Now, at the beginning of each phase, you go to the murder phase. Now, the murderer is going to be able to intimidate 2 civilians. They intimidate any 2 of them. So let's say they do this, and let's say they sort of do this. Now, why would they do that? Well, they're doing that because, as we'll see later, the detective's going to be running around, and let's say they're starting here. They're going to be going around trying to question, but they can't question someone that is intimidated, so they're doing that. But then they're going to murder someone. And so let's say they murder the waitress. Now, they'll put the crime scene for the first murder here. Now, if there were any other civilians, they would move out. The detective actually moves in to kind of look at this thing, the crime scene, and if there are any other civilians, they would move out of there. Now also, this means that civilians can't be moved in here. We'll show you a little later how civilians start to move, but there was a murder here. And this helps you keep track of who was murdered from the different, the first all the way through the 5th to help you keep track of the deduction of that. Now the murderer is trying to keep their motives secret, and they're trying to fulfill as many possible motives as possible just to make it so that they're not narrowing it down. For example, this detective was right here when this one was murdered. Now one of these motives says you cannot murder anyone in the 8 blocks surrounding the detective marker. Well, that one was right next to the detective marker. It was somewhere around it. So we know that they're not a vigilante, but we don't know if any of these can be ruled out yet. No, they can't. But they're trying to basically keep as many of these possible so that we can't narrow it down that fast. But just off that, we would know that it's not vigilante. Now both players are given a pad. The detective's going to be keeping notes here. They're going to keep track of all the motives, and the murderer has their own sheet, and they're keeping track of who the murderer is and things like that. Now as you go on, you're going to be making notes, like you have the different motives, you're marking off which ones are ruling out and things like that. Now then we go to the detective phase. The detective is going to, they already went to the crime scene, but now they're going to perform 2 different actions, and you also get to do 2 movement points, and you can only do the actions once. So we're going to move up to 2, and you can't go diagonal, so I'm going to go 1, 2. So now I am there. Now because I'm here, so movement points is sort of an extra thing, you get 2 of those. But now for one of my actions, I'm going to use to do a questioning. And when you question, you can question all the non-intimidated. See, if they had intimidated this person, I wouldn't be able to question them. But because I moved here, see, I could have moved here, but I only would have been able to question her, not her. Here I can question both. So I would ask the murderer, hey, I'm questioning the ball player, and I want to know, is the murderer male? Now this is a sheet from one of my finished games, so I had asked a lot of people different questions, but essentially you're writing who the civilian was, what social group they're from. Now this is very important because, again, each person is from a certain social group. Now randomly, the criminal was able to select from 3 different social groups at the beginning of the game secretly. And they might have been able to look at it and go, oh, I'm criminals. Anytime this social group gets questioned, the murderer can lie about their answer. Also, if we're questioning the murderer themselves, the murderer can lie. And in an advanced version, once everyone knows what they're doing, there is a person of interest. That's essentially a second random character on the board that can also lie. But I don't recommend playing with this until both players are really good at the game. So depending on who you ask, you're going to keep track of who they are, what social group they are, and what the answer is. Like, hey, I asked if they were male, they said no. But that doesn't mean for sure that they're female, because the person that we asked could either be the murderer and lying, or if you're playing the advanced game, the person of interest in lying, or if they're part of a certain group, that group might be lying. And so you're not sure, you've got to ask a bunch of questions and then kind of double back on some answers and cross-reference other people from different groups and things like that to find out which group or person may or may not be lying. And again, the things that you're asking about are the sex, the age, the build, the height, all of the attributes that are on the characters. So they're going to give me an answer, and I'm going to mark it down on my sheet, and I would then do the same for the bartender. I've already asked a question. I've already used my movement. The other thing I can do is use a building. There's different buildings around. There's a fire department like this. There's diners. There's police stations. There's hospitals. These allow you to do different actions. Now, what this allows you to do, the fire department allows you to take a random social group that is in part of a stack and reveal it outcast. That means that we know that the murderer's social group is not the outcast because his is secret in front of them. And so this one we know. So now we know anytime we question an outcast, they probably are not lying, but if they are, they've got to be the murderer or the person of interest if you're playing with that advanced variant. Now this allows me to move all of the outcasts 0 or 1. So here's one, maybe I move them here. Here's one, I move them here. Why am I doing that? Clumping together is good because you can get, when you question for one action, you get to question everyone there that's not intimidated like this person. Now, if I was at the diner, you can actually question someone at the diner or anyone adjacent. So if I was here and I still have the action left, I can use the diner to question one of these. If I was at the hospital, I can use this to comfort one of the intimidated civilians here or anywhere adjacent. So that's good. The police station's really good because that allows you to put somebody under surveillance. So you could place this on somebody, and then at any time, you could ask the murderer, can this person be murdered right now? So you might put that on there. Maybe you're moving them around, trying to get them in a certain spot to try to figure out what the motive is. And that gives you more information because if this person says yes or no, then it's going to really help you home in on which type of motive they might have. For example, if that professor had it on there and they said, yes, I could kill that person right now, we know that they're not the killer because you can only kill civilians that are alone in the block. That person was with other people. So we now know they're not the killer. However, it's tricky because if that token actually was on the murderer themselves, they must always say no. So if you get a no answer, it's 1 out of 20 chance at the beginning of the game that it might actually be the murderer. They might be lying. So you've got to think about that as well. Now at the end of the detective phase, you go to the city phase. If the detective happens to be where there's intimidated civilians, you can comfort them. And then the murderer is going to reveal one of those random social groups. Now we know that immigrants is not them. We're learning this. And they get to move all the immigrants 0 or 1. Then I will get to do the same thing. I flip it over, labor. Oh, okay, now I know that labor is not part of the social group that's lying for the murderer, but I get to move 0 or 1, all of them 0 or 1 spot. And that's pretty much how you play. That's 1 round. And you'll do this all the way through 5 or 6 rounds because the murderer can decide to not murder, or they might not be able to based upon their motive. And you might go to a 6th round, but at the end of the 6th round, or after the end of the 5th murder, at the end of that round, the detective's trying to say who the murderer is and which motive. And if they get that right, they win. If not, they lose. Now keep in mind, in the basic game, there's only 6 of these used, and these can change every game. And then there's an advanced game where you use actually 8 of these, and then there's some other things that you can do. Also keep in mind, there's only 20 suspects each game, or civilians, but there's actually 54 cards, so you can play the game almost 3 times without even seeing the same ones, but they're always going to be different sort of, builds and stuff like that, so every game's going to feel different. Now, some of the advanced ways to play is, again, to play with a person of interest, that's another person that can lie, or you can play the intuition mode, where over the course of the game, the murderer, every time they murder, they're going to get cards that allow them to do different things, like they can play them at the beginning of the murder phase and intimidate 2 more civilians, or before murder, move in any civilian 1 or 2 blocks. But the detective's also going to be getting some of these tokens that they can look at, and if they're at that building type, like the hospital or the police station, they'll be able to get a card and use some of those, like placing a surveillance token on any civilian in the city, or moving the detective marker to an adjacent block without spending movement. So this gives you some more things to do tactically. Plus, there are a handful of scenarios in the back of the book. Each of these have a different setup. So civilians are in different spots. The buildings are in different spots. They tell you which specific motives to use. You can still play this with the basic version with 6, or you can play it with the intuition mode with 8 as well. But they also give you different rules. Like for example, in this case, the detective can use the surveillance and move it not just from the police station, but from where it was last at, for example. But there's lots of these different scenarios. There are a ton of them in here that really, again, makes the game unlimited replayability. All right, Intent to Kill. Now, first of all, I really like deduction games, so that's my biases coming here. So the reason why I was interested in this game, first thing I love about it, the artwork. Oh my gosh, the artwork is so good. All the illustrations of all these civilians just look so nice. I love the style it's in. I love the coloring of the background. It gives it like a timeless look to it. The artwork really draws you into this game. I mean, it could have been like cartoony art or really gruesome art, and it's neither. It's very realistic looking, but it really draws you in. One negative on the artwork is some of the times you'll see someone that says they have a large build, and it doesn't look like they have a large build at all. Height, you can't really tell. Age is correct. A 60-year-old librarian. She has gray hair. She looks old. But some of the ones that say large build and they look skinny, maybe you just can't see them, but I'm guessing they had to have all this artwork up front. They weren't exactly sure how all the math was going to work. Very minor detail, but the artwork is awesome. This game is a cat and mouse game. It's got deduction, it's got abstract movements, it's got bluffing and double bluffing. And hey, you think I'm going to do this, but I know that you know that I know that you know that, all that type of thing. And it's a big head game. It's a big of, hey, they wouldn't do this because this. Well, maybe they will, because if you think they're not going to do it because of that, they're going to do it one of these games just to keep you honest. If you like that type of head gaming, just to, that aspect of getting in other players' heads while you're playing a game like this, this game has that in spades. I like that the murderer and the social group can lie, because as you're getting data as the detective, you're like getting this stuff, and you ask a question and you get an answer. And then later on you ask the same question or another question in the same type of thing, and you're like, wait a minute, somebody's lying here, either this person or this person. And then you're like, okay, well, which one is it? Is one of these the murderer or one of these in the social group? So then you try to ask the question a third time to something else to try to narrow down, well, which person was lying, right? Just the fact that the murderer could lie and the social group could lie puts so much paranoia in the detective that it makes you be not quite as efficient, right? Because you're trying to ask the same questions that you supposedly already know the answer to. And if they weren't lying, because they don't have to, you're just running around in circles chasing your own tail, right? It's really interesting. Now, there is that the person of interest that you can add in. I recommend not doing that. It's already hard enough for the detective when you're first playing with having the murderer be able to lie and the whole social group being able to lie. And you'll never get perfect information about social group, because 2 of the social groups are removed out of the game that the detective gets to decide which ones are removed of 3. They basically draw 3, they pick 1 to be theirs, and they put 2 out, right? But that's another thing, part of the head game. So you look at this and you're like, there are a lot of green sort of health people here. If the detective had a chance to select the green group, they're probably going to do it because they're going to give them more chances to lie. But again, the murderer might go, well, they might think that, so I'm going to pick a different group that doesn't have as many. So there's only 1 person on the board of this type. I'm going to pick them. I'm going to sort of manipulate and move the characters and do different things and intimidate and do things, murder close to where that person is, so it will lead them to them, and then they can lie. And the person's going to be like, they wouldn't have selected one with just 1 group, would they have? Not usually, but if they want to mess with you, they will. That type of thing is going on. This game has unlimited replayability. I mean, all of the characters, you can play the game about three times without even seeing the same civilians twice. And then it doesn't matter. Even if you had the same civilians, or even just 2 times as many civilians, you're gonna have this different mix. And that's also interesting, that every time you play, you might be like, there's actually no people from this group here, from the social group. Or, the first game I played this, there was like way more males than females. So that was a very important thing to figure out early. So you're just gonna have a different distribution of the attributes. Their male or female, their height, their build, their age. And the puzzle's always gonna be different depending on which civilians are out there. And those are randomly shuffled, so that alone is. Only 6 of the 12 motives are used in the normal base game. Right? So there's also a guide to tell you which ones to put together, which ones to try to not put together, because it makes it a little harder because they're harder to distinguish from each other, things like that. Plus the randomized setup. Even if you play with the same citizens, they're going to be in a different spot on the board to start the game, which can also change a lot of what you're doing. I do like that there are some advanced variants here. So you have the person of interest that you can add. Again, adding another person that can lie. And then if you got 2 people that you've covered lie, you don't know if there's the murderer, the person of interest, or the social group. I don't recommend playing with that. I think the game is hard enough with just the murderer and the social group lying. Personally, I don't think I ever need to add the person of interest. That intuition mode that adds all the cards and the things. I'm glad they did this because I'm sure some people are going to like that. I didn't like it quite as much. I like my deduction games to be very pure. That added, there's 2 cards in there I absolutely hate, would never play with. One was just like cancel an action. Are you serious? I get 10 actions per game as a detective. One of those actions, I basically go and do this and move to where I want to do. I do a thing and you're like, cancel that action? It's like, I just lost like 1/10 of my actions for the game. Plus now I'm in a position that I don't want to be in because I couldn't get to do anything. I hated that card. I would never play with that card again. There's also one on the detective side that does a similar thing. I just don't like, even if you know what the cards do, I don't like the idea of like, I've got a plan, I'm trying to do this, I only got 10 actions, I'm really trying to narrow things down, they could possibly be lying, and now you're throwing monkey wrenches in the plan to have to adapt and change and do this and that. I didn't like the intuition mode as much. Some people would. In fact, Greg Dixon that you see on this channel a lot, he liked the intuition mode better because he felt like it gave him more flexibility, more things to do as the murderer, and I could see that. The scenarios. Personally, I like the base game, no person of interest, but I like playing the scenarios. That gives enough difference. Gives you a new setup, new places where the buildings are. So maybe 1 or 2 new rules for that scenario, and that's it. And to me, that is my favorite way to play the game. This game feels, someone asked me like, what does this game feel like? It doesn't really feel like anything. It feels like a hidden movement game, even though you're not moving. Because the murderer's not really moving, they're able to be anywhere they want to murder. Because it's like they're trying to figure out where you're at. One person has tension and they're trying to figure out what to do. The other person's trying to do the logic spreadsheet deduction thing. Feels like a hidden movement, but it's not. The game this probably most feels like to me is Mr. Jack. And as you know, if you watch my channel, Mr. Jack in New York, that version is my second favorite game of all time. Where one plays a detective, one plays a murderer. They're doing this abstract thing with abilities, trying to finagle the other one. So to me, it still feels very different from Mr. Jack. But if someone said, what is this game most like? I would say that. Couple of negative things. I think it should have come with little player shields to hide your notes. It says, don't cheat, don't look at the player's notes. Come on. It wouldn't have been that big to put a little paper shield there so we could keep it hidden. Incorrect, any deduction game, if someone gives you an incorrect answer, it breaks the game. This is no different. You could put a surveillance thing on something, they could look at it, and just sometimes asking yes or no about that, they might screw it up. And that could break your game if you get the wrong answer. So it doesn't happen often, but it can happen. Nope, it's not a fault of this game alone. Almost every deduction game has that possibility. Sometimes it will come down to the point where you're like, I'm pretty sure I know who the murderer is. It's got to be one of these 2 motives. I couldn't tell between one or the other. I'm just gonna go 50-50. Or you might be like, I know the murder. I know for sure the motive. It's got to be one of these 2 people. I'm just gonna guess. And granted, it's probably never really a guess. You can look at what they've done. You can look at the patterns they did and do it. But sometimes it can feel like it comes down to a 50-50 for 45 minute to an hour game. That's a negative too. But overall, if I like these style of games because I love deduction, but I can play this with people that don't like deduction. They can be the murderer. They can do a lot of things. They can try to get in my head. They can try to do clever things to try to do things here and there, and I can play a deduction game, right? So this game, if you like hidden movement games where you're the person running away, or you like the deduction games, either side of this, you'd like to play that side. This game is fantastic. I would be surprised if this doesn't end up on my top 10 games of the year at the end of the year here. Intent to Kill is a fantastic one for all these reasons. It's staying in my gaming collection and getting my highest honor, a Saxophone Serenade, so let's hit it. Game Toppers upgrades every game you play, and if you missed their 4.0 Kickstarter, you can still late pledge and take advantage of over 40 unlocked stretch goals and early fulfillment. This campaign featured a new Young Sherlock table, perfect for children's gaming, and movable coffee table, 10 new thematic mats by top artists like Vincent Dutray, a new designer art series Minecraft topper with thematic art from Brent Woodside, and some of the best package deals they've had, including game mat bundles. Go to GameToppersLLC.com or click the link below to late pledge now.